What does it mean to take responsibility for your life? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, everybody. I'm Scott Patton.
I'm Chaffee Conwayan.
Yeah. And we're talking about some of the reasons why people are not successful in business. And of course, oftentimes, if you're not successful in business, you're also not successful in your personal life, and there is definitely overlap. And one of the biggest problems is denial, and denial comes from not taking responsibility. Like it's Chaffee's fault, not my fault. And of course,
thanks, Scott.
And away you go from there down this rabbit hole that will never get you what you want. And I think not taking responsibility, but I think part of the problem, Chaffee, is that people don't understand what responsibility is. And so let's start off with a level playing field. What do you think when people talk about responsibility, what do they mean in your mind?
Well, responsibility, the key word of responsibility is response, right? And it's your response to something that's happening. And your response could be some people making an excuse and pointing and blaming other people, or your response could be, oh, well, it happened and how do I deal with it, right? And so that's the key thing, is that when something happens, and I think, I guess we'll just dive right into it, Scott.
Well, it's so funny because you're absolutely right. I totally agree with everything you said. And if I'd answered it first, it would have been, I think, either completely different or obscure. I'm not sure which way to go with it. Okay. Because the thing that went through my mind, and remember everybody, I spent 20 years as a grocery store manager and a clerk. So my shift started at 6 p.m. or it started at 7 a.m. and I had to be there ready to work at that time. So for me, responsibility was, I'm scheduled to be here at a certain time. I'm here at a certain time. And that was the little box of responsibility that I had. It was kind of funny, right? Because I know it's way bigger than that, but to me it was doing what you say you're going to do, or doing what you've agreed to do, because sometimes you've agreed to work for that company and the company expects you in at 7 in the morning. So you're going to be there at 7 in the morning. And of course, oftentimes companies have a problem when you show up at noon to work, wondering where you were all morning, right? But is that different than what you're talking about? Because you're right, like the response, like a conscious response to something as opposed to a reaction. That's what I got out of what you said. Like a lot of people will be, and they have all this drama and everything else because they're just reacting to the situation. And that, of course, is not being responsible.
Yeah. And so I was, as I said, we'll just dive right into it. And I agree with you as well. It's taking responsibility for the things that you, for everything in your life, right? Not just, just for random stuff. It's for everything in your life, whatever happens in your life. And if you're not taking notes, this is a good time to take notes. And I would write this down, which is, you are responsible for 100% of the things that happen in your life, whether you understand it or not, right? So you're responsible for 100% of things in your life, whether you understand it or not. And a lot of times, as you said, Scott, people do not understand what's going on. And so because they don't understand it, they say, well, it's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. So they back off and they don't do anything. And so,
and I would add to that, kind of the other sort of layer of that is, with their parents usually, or their family unit, they have a way of responding to a situation, and it can be a positive way or a negative way. So, and the negative way we tend to call react, right? So if you came to mom or dad when you were 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, and their reaction was this big blow up over something that really is insignificant, right? I mean, children spill stuff, so it's just, so is the response, no problem, dear, let's clean it up, and they teach the kid how to clean up? Or is it like, oh, the world is being destroyed, right? And they bring that up. And I think these things get into our subconscious. So when we react, it's just the subconscious taking over the fight or flight, and there's no space for responsibility. And it takes work to go for me, it took a lot of work to go from reacting to things because of how I was raised growing up, how I was trained in my job, to responding to people. And so it's not, so I don't want people to be listening and watching to us and say, well, I just have to respond instead of react. Okay. I mean, it's not going to happen, folks.
Well, it goes back to what you're saying, is that, when you make an agreement, when you make a commitment to do something, like you said, show up to work at 9 o'clock, right? That is your responsibility to show up to work at 9 o'clock. And the second part of that is what I was saying, is that if you show up at 9:30, right, what is your response to your responsibility?
Traffic was bad. Traffic was bad. It's not my fault.
Correct. So, did you plan ahead for traffic? Did you, whatever it is? And
it's a bad excuse. Right?
Well, and that's the key word right there, right, Scott, is excuse.
Yeah.
And
I have to interrupt you for this story, because I brought up, being in a grocery store. I worked midnights, and one midnight we had a problem with there's a little tractor thing that takes the pallets of food out, and it made a huge mess. And no, it wasn't. Well, that was a different story. But anyway, my boss pulled me in the office, closes the door, and says, and it was nice, because normally they go up one side of you yelling and down the other side of you yelling. But he just said, did you do this? And I went, yes. And he said, why did you do that? And I had no answer. Like, of course, I'm stressed out too, right?
Were you popping wheelies with that thing? Just.
But it made big black marks on the tile.
Got it.
And I said, and I answered as really honestly, without thinking. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And he goes, oh, okay, get back to work. But if I'd have said, Chaffee told me to do it, or I can't even think of an excuse, right? Yeah. Any excuse, but taking responsibility, he would have been ripping me apart, right? I mean, he was like a lion, just ready, because he was pissed, right? He was like mad at me because this thing happened and it shouldn't have happened, and I did it. Everybody knew I did it, right?
But it wasn't your fault, right? It wasn't your fault. Somebody else told you to do it. Somebody else dared you to burn some rubber and might make some skid marks, right?
Yeah. That would have put me in so much doo-doo.
So add this to your notes if you're taking notes, which is no excuses, right? Do not make excuses for things. And as you said, Scott, if you did something right, wrong, or indifferent, just like you did it. So just take responsibility for the fact that you did it, and deal with the consequences that come out of that, right?
That's right. And there's a difference between doing something wrong once and doing it wrong for the 378th time, right? In terms of how you deal with it, in terms of business, right? If somebody's doing the same thing over and over and over again, then you have to take a little more drastic action than just, well, okay, if you thought it was a good idea, it wasn't, so don't do it again. But you can only say that a couple of times before you realize there's a deeper problem.
Here's another nugget. Here's another writer downer for the notes for everyone out there, Scott, is that when you don't take responsibility, or when you make excuses for things, then you give up control of your life, right? And so when you make a commitment and something happens and you make excuses, that just means that somebody else is in control of your life. You're not in control of it. And so you just go along with the flow of things. And that's going to happen your entire life, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, is that other people, other things, other external factors are in control, and you're letting them be in control because you're not taking responsibility for everything that is happening to you. And the opposite is true, is that when you take responsibility for the things that happen in your life, then that allows you, and this is really key too, that allows you the power to change things if you don't like them. That gives you the power and the authority to make different decisions to move forward with your life. And so taking 100% responsibility is important for that control factor. And there's one other thing that I want to touch on, Scott, before you comment on anything. It doesn't mean that you're blaming yourself for
Right.
all the bad things in your life, right? So it's not a negative thing, right? It's an empowerment thing where it's allowing you to empower yourself to take control of things, and you're not blaming yourself. You're just taking responsibility for the things that are happening so that you can make the right decisions going forward.
That's a great point, because this is not about beating yourself up. This is about, becoming successful and understanding the things that get in the way of your success. And I think one of the things that I live is the subconscious mind and unconscious mind make up, let's just say, 95% of everything that you do, right? We don't think about, heart, beat, please, beat, beat, beat. It just happens, right?
Right.
And it's the same with so much of our life is on autopilot. And we know, and the great example, of course, is when you drive the same route every day, you tune out and you get to work and you go like, oh, I don't remember driving anywhere, right? It was just kind of a scary thought. Yeah. But, and as long as your subconscious mind is, congruent with you and wants to go to work, is no problem. If your subconscious mind is like a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old and it says, I don't want to go to work, and you wonder why you had a car accident, that could be why, right? It's because you didn't really want to go to work. And one of the things when it comes to responsibility that you mentioned was doing what you agreed to do. Now, I happen to have a tendency to be a people person and say yes way more than I should. I'm sure I'm in a small minority in the planet about this. And I'm also learning Spanish. And I had a really interesting time when I was in Colombia just about 3 or 4 months ago, because a bunch of my friends said, we're going to go on this big long hike and we're going to have a picnic. And it was a wonderful hike and it was a wonderful picnic. And we got practicing some Spanish. And one of the things that they started asking me questions, and I had to try and figure out what they were asking and then answer no or sí. And I was answering no or sí. And then one of them, and I'm struggling a little bit because I don't know if I should answer no or sí, right? And then one of them's, but I had no other alternative. My only answers were in my mind, because this is all I knew about Spanish, was no or sí. And then one of them said, depende, depends. And I thought, oh, what a great word. Because so often we get like cornered and we feel like we have to make a decision right now, but we haven't had time to think about it, look at our schedule, decide if we really want to do it or not. And so we never say, it depends. Let me get back to you. Let me think about it. And I feel, my background was the dairy is empty, so Scott, go fill it now. Like there was never it had to be done like now. And that's where I got that into my subconscious, was if Chaffee says, Scott, would you like to do this? It's like, I got to answer right now because I got to fill the milk if the milk is empty, right? Whatever the milk being, of course, whatever you're talking about. And my Spanish friends were like, oh, it depends, right? Oh, and that gives you time to think about, because if you don't want to do something and then your subconscious knows that you don't want to do it, then it's going to make it harder and harder and harder for you to do it.
So let me just summarize that or clarify that if I could for a second, make sure I understand exactly what you're saying, and everyone else listening can understand as well, which is...
Are you saying that nobody understood me?
Well,
I'm not understand.
It's that Canadian accent of yours. It's so heavy, eh? So what you're saying though is that don't just say yes or no to things when people ask you, hey, are you free on Thursday? Can you come over? And you say, sure, yeah, I'll come over. And knowing that possibly you might be busy doing something else, and then you don't show up on Thursday, right? So it could be, let me, that's a good question. I don't know yet. Let me get back to you. Or it depends on whether I have to do this or this, if I could show up. So you're not making a commitment. at that point, you're just
Right.
saying, hold off, let me check, versus saying, yes, I'll do it, and then not do it.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah. Or backing out, because what
Or
happens with
backing up.
me is I'll say, yes, I'll do it. And then it's like 2 weeks away. And then like 13 days go by and it's like, oh, no, I just can't do this. And then you have to back out. And then that becomes the pattern, right? Like Scott
Right.
always says yes, and then he always backs out. And that's not, the self-esteem does not go up when you're in that situation, right? Not for
Well,
me, not for them.
there's two things that you said there. First of all, and this is another writer downer, is how you do one thing is how you do everything, right?
Right.
And so I love that statement. How you do one thing is how you do everything. How you do the little things is how you do the big things. And so if you're making these little commitments of I'll show up, I'll do this, I'll do that, and then you don't do it, how does that reflect on the bigger things in your life? How does that reflect on the bigger, projects and the bigger commitments in your life when you say, I'm going to do something, and then all of a sudden you don't do it?
Yep.
Because, you've built a habit of not doing things with these little things. And all of a sudden, when it comes to the big things, that habit, as you said, subconsciously, you're used to not doing things, even though you said you would. So
Right.
that's the first thing. So don't make commitments that you aren't positive of that you'll actually carry through and actually do. And then the second thing is you build a reputation, right? People start to recognize who you are, your personality, what your habits are. And so when you say, I'm going to do something, and you are known not to do it, they may not believe you, right?
Right.
So that's part of your integrity. That's part of who you are, your brand, your recognition. And so people start, just brushing you aside because you don't follow through with their commitments.
Right. People need the people around them to be dependable.
Yes.
And you can be, and I was going to say dependable or not dependable, but it's either it's dependable in doing it or it's dependable in not doing it. And then if you're dependable in not doing it, then they don't ask you to do anything, and your business opportunities drop, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if everyone believed that Scott wasn't going to show up on time for a recording session, they'd go find somebody else to record with. And that would be.
It's kind of like when you thought I didn't show up for the recording a couple weeks ago. Like, where's this Chaffee guy? and you had your time zones wrong, Scott.
That's right. I'll tell you, I think that the time should be the same time everywhere in the world. And if you get up at 2 a.m. because the sun gets up at 2 a.m. where you are, that's fine, right? Just call it 2 a.m. And
what a different world we would be.
Yeah, that would really change people's perceptions, wouldn't it? So one of the things that happens when people don't take responsibility is they blame other people or other things for the problem. So how do you get past that? Chaffee, you should have known that I didn't have the time zones right and adjusted for that and been on time instead of me being late.
Well, again, when I blame other people, I release myself of the responsibility of that action. I think I do, right? And
right.
Most people think they do. And so because I've released myself of that action, that situation can reoccur. That situation can pop up anytime in my life because I haven't taken care of it, right? I've just said, oh, it's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. It's, it's all Scott's fault. He should have known better, yada, yada, yada. And then if it ever happens again, well, it's still Scott's fault. It's never my fault. And then it happens again and again and again. As you said, Scott, it's a repeat action that happens in your life when you start blaming people for other things that have happened versus what we've said, which is take responsibility, take control, and say, well, Scott showed up at the wrong time. Now, how do we circumvent that from happening again? How do we prevent that from occurring again? And taking control of that situation. And as you did, Scott, you took control by having your assistant make sure that you're emailed the time every week so that you don't have to think about it, right?
No, I had her email you every week so that you knew the correct time to show up.
Okay. There you go.
But, I want to go back to this responsibility and responding, right? Because when we're in a situation that's stressful and tense, we're angry, or we're upset, it's very easy to just, well, like we said, react, not take responsibility. And I think it's really important that you be aware of what's going on. Like, hey, I'm stressed out, I'm angry, and then is this behavior or this response that I'm going to do helpful in whatever situation I'm in? And as you were talking, you reminded me of a time when I was with this gal, like this is almost 20 years ago, and she loved watching like The Bold and Beautiful, the soap opera in the afternoon. And we were heading out, and she goes and she puts the VHS cartridge, this is a long time ago, in and has it set to record. But when she put it in, she wasn't paying attention, and she put it in enough that it pushed it out. And I'm standing there and I see that, right? And I'm mad at her this day. Like, I'm really not very happy with her at all. And I thought, I could just leave that. And then she'll get home and she'll be all mad because not my fault, right? So this little self-sabotaging or relationship sabotaging thing was going on. And I thought, well, that's not really who I want to be. So I pushed it in. And then we're still like, nah, nah, nah. And we get out to the car, and I told her, I said, you left this cassette. You thought you put it in. You didn't put it in. I noticed I pushed it in because I want to have a good relationship with you, and I know how much this means to you to watch. And I went on a little bit of a tirade about relationships for a second. And I'll never forget, like, she was just standing there like a deer in headlights. Like nobody had ever, watched out for her before in that way. Right. And here was this big blow up that would have happened, not at me, at the cassette player, because of something that she hadn't done, fully. And I think that we don't think about those sort of things. Like, what sort of relationship do you want to have with your staff, with your boss, with your coworkers, with your customers, with your suppliers, like whatever it is. And then what do you need to do in different situations to make sure those relationships grow and get better and better and better?
So I think you lost half our audience because they don't know what a cassette tape VCR is. I haven't been around for a while.
It's the old red record button that we just have built into everything now.
So everything is TiVoed or recorded or on demand now, right?
On demand now, yeah. You don't even need a TiVo.
Yeah, that's right. Now, besides that fact, what you brought up was a good point, and it goes back to what I said earlier, is that you could have easily sat back and done nothing, and it wouldn't have affected you in any way because it was her that wanted to watch that show and record it, and she couldn't take care of it, and she was the one getting upset. Yada yada yada. Only my point is that it happened while you were there,
right?
And part of your life, and you were able to observe that. And, instead of sitting back and making excuses of, oh, well, it's her fault. I don't really care about that. It's not anything. Well, it's like I said, it's in your life, and you're right there. And you took control and you took responsibility and said, this is something that I could affect. Now, I'm not saying be nosy. I'm not saying barge.
Yeah, no, we were just standing there talking, and she's doing this stuff, and I noticed that she didn't do it right.
So don't barge in and do something that is none of your business kind of deal. Only just realize that you can take responsibility, you can take control of everything that happens in your life, and you can decide to say, hey, I can help this situation by just making a comment, by pushing that in and making sure it's recording and everything else, and that helps alleviate some of the things that might happen down the road. So
yeah, well, it's the emotional bank account, right? Like if you make deposits in there, then when something goes wrong, like when I have a meeting with somebody and I don't have a strong relationship with them at this point, like it's kind of in the beginning part, and they miss the appointment. They say, oh, I'm so sorry. Like I thought it was at 2 and not at 1. I'm happy because like it's no problem and everything else, because I know that now when I make a mistake, I've kind of got a little bit in the emotional bank account of like, well, you made a mistake and now I made a mistake. So it's okay. Like we're human. And I don't know that ever gets cashed out. I hope it never gets cashed out, but we all make mistakes. So when you're magnanimous towards somebody who's made a mistake with you, then they know, hey, because their reaction then is, well, Scott didn't get upset when I made a mistake, so I guess I won't get upset when he makes a mistake. And then you talk it through, as opposed to the drama and blame game.
So you've touched upon something that we don't really have the time to discuss in this training session, or in this topic that we're discussing. And you said one of the words, which is emotional. And what I'm referring to is what we call emotional intelligence, or EQ, or IQ, not IQ, EQ, right? And so if you've never heard of the study of emotional intelligence, that's something you should definitely look into. And what emotional intelligence is really understanding, as you said, Scott, the relationship and the feelings that you feel, the emotions that you feel when you're with yourself and with others. And so there's an internal emotional effect, and there's an external emotion effect. And so when you do get upset at something, the sooner you recognize that you're upset, the faster you can deal with that situation, right? So some people get upset and they don't know they're upset, and they just rant and they rave and go on and on and on, and they don't recognize how they're affecting their lives and other people's lives by ranting and being, grumpy and upset. And if you sit back and just say, I'm really grumpy right now. Why am I grumpy? And ask those questions, and then figure out, I'm grumpy because this occurred, and then say, well, how do I, deal with this so that I'm not so grumpy? Or if I am grumpy, what can I do with that? Right. And
sometimes, you just have to sit in it and just let it kind of percolate and go away, because there are times when it's appropriate to be sad. Maybe it's appropriate to be grumpy. I don't know about that one, but there are times when it's appropriate to be mad or to be concerned, or like some of the things that we think of as negative, not so far as like hating people. I don't think that's ever appropriate, but there are times when it's like, it's appropriate. And I remember when I was like 8 months in Medellin, Colombia, and I put down roots and I had good friends. And then when I left, like for the week before I left and about 2 weeks after I left, I was sad. And I'm like, why am I sad? I'm sitting on this beautiful beach. My health is good. My family's good. Business is good. Like I had no reason. And then it took me a while to realize that I'm missing my friends, which is a totally appropriate response and emotion and a feeling, right? And then, but once you understand, like self-awareness is a key part of emotional intelligence. And once you're aware of like where it's coming from, then it's kind of like that, because I was worried, like, why am I depressed, right? But now it's like, oh yeah, I'm behaving normal because when you leave your good friends, you should be sad, right? Otherwise, like they weren't really good friends. And then I could be with it, right? Because I wasn't like trying to figure out what was going on, because then I knew what was going on. And then you just sit with it, and then it just, it does its natural whatever it does, and then you're on to new feelings. But
which is when I was I had a student once that I was working with. This was years ago, and he was in an investment deal, a real estate deal, and he had a business partner that he was working with. And this business partner took all the money, took everything, and ran away. And so he was, rightly so, he was very upset, shall we say. He was more than upset. He was, very angry, shall we say. And, by the time he got to me, this had already occurred, and he had talked to a bunch of people, and everyone was like, it's not your fault. Don't be upset. You couldn't have done anything. It's your partner's fault. He screwed you over. He ran off. There's nothing you could do. So, don't worry about it. You'll get over it. You'll be fine. And that really made him even more upset, right? Because he wasn't allowed to express his anger. He wasn't allowed to be upset or angry because it wasn't his fault, right? And when he got to me and I sat down with him and we were talking, I was just like, man, I'd be pissed. Excuse me. I'd be, I'd be super, upset. I'd be angry. He's like, really? He's like, yeah, you should be angry. That's what I was telling him. Like, I'd be upset. Why shouldn't you be upset? Like, you should be angry, get upset, get mad. Yeah. And I was like, and I could literally see like this weight lifted off his shoulders. that, somebody finally gave him permission, which he could have done himself, only he didn't understand it, right?
Right.
Only, somebody finally gave him permission to be angry at the situation.
To be human.
To be human, right? And I said, it's okay to be angry as long as, one, you recognize that you're angry, and then two, realize that anger is another source of energy for you to use.
Yes.
When you recognize that, to do something. And so I said, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit there and wallow in your anger? Are you going to sit there and just, cry and be a victim of woe is me, that, my partner ran off with everything and screwed me over? Or are you going to take that anger and go do some more deals and make more money and then forget about it because, you've now like recouped all your losses and you're moving forward with things? It's like, are you going to take that anger and use it as empowerment, or are you going to take that anger and let it beat you down and, not do anything? And he didn't even realize he could do that, right? Because he was told not to be angry. And so
it was blocking everything. And then he's stuck. Yeah. That's huge.
So, recognizing the fact that, one, it's okay to be angry and it's okay to feel emotions, right? And then two, determining what to do with those emotions after you recognize it. That's key, and that's part of emotional intelligence, is realizing that you have authority, you have power and control of doing things when you feel certain things. So emotions are very powerful, and so many people are just on autopilot, their entire lives, and they don't even realize it. So
yeah. Or as your friend, they're suppressing the emotion, right? You've got this powerful energy in you that can just catapult you to new heights if you use it the right way. And all his friends are helping him to push it down and tamper it, and not let it out and not let it get expressed. And that's just, and what's the point, right? Like, you were reminding me of, I have a Bachelor of Commerce honors degree, and there's only 2 or 3 things I remember. And one of them was a professor saying, business is all about logic. It has no room for emotions. And I just think, was there a more incorrect statement said in a university than that? I don't know, right? Like, it was just like, he's totally wrong. It's all about relationships. It's all about business. I mean, emotions, because typically we like to deal with people. We prefer to deal with people that we know, like, and trust. I don't trust you. Why? Like, this guy trusted his partner, and unfortunately that didn't work out great. But if he didn't trust his partner wouldn't be his partner, right?
So the question is, when you're taking responsibility for that situation and the partner ran off with the money, is, are you responsible for that, or are you the victim for that? And we're talking about taking responsibility for your life, and my response to that would be, going forward, what can you look for in a partner so that this may not occur, or that would lessen the chances of it occurring again? Finding the right partner is critical. Did you, before you partnered up with this individual, who were they? What did you know about them? And realizing that, sometimes anything and everything you do in your life, you're still going to make mistakes, and that it's okay to make mistakes. It's just an ever growing, ever learning process, that you always need to learn from your mistakes so that you move forward. So
yeah, and also, like, I think you need to look at, like you said, you need to look at that situation and you say, okay, what could I have done differently? Where did I screw up? What sort of systems do we need to put in place that we didn't put in place that would allow us to know that? I have a friend who's very similar to your client, who was his CFO embezzled $450,000. And, so basically it's like, he gets a call, the check bounced. He gets a call, there's no money in the bank. The bank is, telling him there's no money. And he's like, what happened? And the guy's gone with the money. And he was mad. And so his response was to go to the police. And the police said, well, in these situations, it's hard to prove. It's this, it's that. You should just, like, let it go. And he wouldn't let it go. So he spent the next 2 years creating a 2,500-page document that he then took to the police, and they had a criminal case. They charged the guy, they convicted the guy, he went to jail. He also did a civil suit to get his money back. The guy had a gambling problem, he had no money. So then they said, well, if we put him in jail, I mean, it's up to you. They actually, you're the victim. So, we're giving you the options. He can go to jail, you'll never get your money back, or he could, do this community, whatever it is, and, maybe get a job and then maybe be able to pay you your money back, which is probably not going to happen. I don't know what the final decision was, but he pretty much lost his business because he spent 2 years focusing on revenge and not 2 years focusing on restoring his business. So
Right.
he had all that energy that he put into the 2,500 pages. If he'd have taken that and put it into his business, he would have been a lot better off. So sometimes, you have to make sure that you're using what you're using constructively, not, it looks, you could make a case that it looks constructive, but the bottom line is that when you have, when you're stumbling from month to month to month to pay the bills, and before you had $400,000 in the bank, you're not, right?
Yeah. And so again, I would agree with you in the sense of, you always want to do what you can do, right? You always want to, in that kind of situation, stay on top of it as much as possible. And you always want to focus on creating more. You always want to focus on moving forward in a positive way, because that negative energy, when you're focusing, whatever you focus on grows, right? And that's a racket counter too. Whatever you focus on grows. And when you focus on fraud and negativity and stealing, that stuff just grows, and then you attract more of that in your life. And as you said, he ended up just going out of business, whereas he would have focused on rebuilding, regrowing, and redoing, then he could have gotten to a certain point, and he still could have, maybe started building a case over the long term if he wanted to, with a minimal amount of energy.
Right.
Only the main focus would have been building and growing. And after a certain point, he could have then decided, well, what's happened has happened, and I'm doing so well now that it doesn't really matter anymore, and could have dropped it. Or then he could have paid somebody to do it instead. Right. So,
right. Well, 2,500 pages. I mean, how many books could you have written instead?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And he could have been a best-selling author. I mean, I don't know, but it was just the bottom, the end result was not a good result. And it was because but that's how powerful, the energy is, that the emotional energy we have, because the police told him, forget it. It's not going to happen. His lawyer told him, forget it. It's not going to happen. And he proved them all wrong. Like, they looked at the case, the attorney general looked at the case, or whoever, they charged the guy. Here's all that. Yeah, I'm guilty. And, off to jail he went. So you can do anything, there's so much that we can do when we're not tapping down and pushing against the energy, and when we're not misdirecting the energy is my point.
Well, and that's the key, is that he could have taken that energy, right, and directed it in the right way, versus taking that energy and going down the rabbit hole, which is what he did. Right.
Right. So the last point that we want to talk about is about not accepting / taking control. And we've talked a little bit about it. In fact, in both your friend and my friend who got ripped off, taking control is probably at the bottom of the problem, or the base of the problem. But when we talk about not accepting, what are we really talking about?
Well, I mentioned it at the beginning, which is, again, when you allow other things, other people, external factors to be in control of your life, then, that by allowing that to occur, then your destiny is set, and your destiny is set by other people, right? You're not in control. You're not living your life. And I'll give you an example, is that if you're passionate about something, only you've been raised your entire life to go to school, get a good job, right? Make some money, go to your 9 to 5, and you don't like your 9 to 5, only that's what you've been doing. You're allowing that job, that 9 to 5, that paycheck that you think, is your security blanket, because that's what you've been taught, to then prevent you from doing what you're really passionate about. And I'm actually writing a book, Scott, right now. And in that book, I have a story about a good friend of mine who his father worked for 40 years and retired, and that's what he'd been programmed to do, is go to school, get a good job, work his entire life. And he sees me doing this entrepreneurial stuff and he just calls me crazy. And
Right.
so he'll never open his own business, he'll never open his own job. And he came out and told me, he's like, listen, my father worked 40 years, retired, and now he's enjoying life, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work my job, and then I'm going to retire and enjoy my life. I'm like, well, why are you waiting, right? And I know that is true passion, what he's truly passionate about, because that's all he posts on his social media, on his Facebook, on everything else, and that's all he talks about when he has free time, is to golf. He loves golfing. Like, he's on the golf course everywhere, anytime he can. So he has a good job, only he's working, 40, 50 hours a week. And then he gets on the golf course whenever he can, sometimes after work and then on the weekends. And he loves doing that. And instead, if he would have taken control and really just said, hey, you know what? My passion is golfing. I really want to be in this golfing industry. Instead of getting a job, and he's an engineer, which is probably the worst thing that you do if you're passionate about golfing, right? So he could have gotten a job somewhere, maybe on a golf course, right? Or he could have worked with golf professionals somehow. He could have, just left that engineering, that job, and just decided, I'm going to, focus on golfing and make a life and career out of golfing somewhere in the golfing industry.
Right. It's a huge industry. There's lots of opportunity.
Exactly. And I'm sure he would have done well because he's a smart guy. I mean, he's doing fine as an engineer. He could do fine somewhere in the golfing industry. And then he could be playing golf all day, every day, right? And it just never crosses his mind because of the way that he's programmed and the way that he's letting other people control his life. And if he really just said, you know what, I want to design my own life. I want to really just focus on my passion and, get a job there, and maybe even then open his own golf store, which he could have made a lot of money doing his own golf store, right? And then set his own hours. He could be on the golf course all the time and really, really enjoy his life and his passion versus just on the side once in a while, right?
Right.
And so, that's one way of taking control of your life, is really, figuring out what it is that you want to do and how to do it, and then how to succeed in doing it. And then the other way that we've talked, Scott, also is not letting negative things affect you, and realizing that, you have the authority, you have the power to put things in place so that when you are affected by negative things, then you recognize that and you use those energies to move forward in a positive way. Right.
Right. Yeah. You remind me of when I was working for an internet marketing training company around 2004. We were doing boot camps, 3-day boot camps, and we were out of Vancouver. And one day there was about 5 of us were going to Atlanta. So we got to the airport at 6 o'clock in the morning because we're on the opposite coast. We flew to Toronto. When we got to Toronto, we had to go from the terminal we arrived at to another terminal to go through U.S. Customs to a third terminal to take the flight. And so this whole thing was like, it was like midnight when we arrived in Atlanta, right? And when we arrived at the hotel. And our boss, who was the featured speaker at the boot camp, was not allowed into the United States. So we get there and there's a message saying that we're going to be on a flight at 6 o'clock in the morning coming home because he couldn't make it. So they've had to cancel it. And of course, all this stuff is happening while we're in the air. So we have no idea. And I'm this kind of like the senior person there. And I get the note, I tell everybody, and I go, well, let's get some sleep and we'll see you at 6 o'clock and we'll go to the airport. And I was just totally, and I never thought about it. I was kind of like, well, what can we do about it, right? I mean, what can you get mad about? Sure, it's a total waste of 2 days, but there's nothing you can do. And I went to sleep. And then about 3 weeks later, one of the guys on the trip said, we were all so mad that this whole thing was canceled. And then you were just like super calm, said, well, it's canceled. All right, go get some sleep. And so all their negative and anger just dissipated. So we said, oh, okay, so we'll go to sleep. And it was just funny how we can model things like people around us. We don't know. I had no idea anybody was upset or mad, right? I just thought, well, I'm tired. I'm going to bed.
That's because you weren't emotionally intelligent at that point in time.
Like the other ones were. But the reason I bring that up is when we're accepting of the situations, even if they're not ideal, it makes a huge impression on the people around us who are ready to have some sort of reaction based on, their 3-year-old experience with their mom or their dad or grandma or grandpa or something like that, as opposed to just saying, well, what is an appropriate response in these situations? Well, this one was, we're all tired, let's go get some sleep and go home. But the inappropriate response is what most people will do, which is like, rah, 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 drink 5 beer, stay up too late, get 3 hours sleep, and then have to go home. And then it's a really, really bad trip.
So I hesitate to bring this up, and I'll bring it up anyway, Scott, which is what's happened in the United States in the past, 4+ years has come to a
head.
Come to a head. And here's the thing: is that whatever political aspirations or thoughts you have, if you're watching the news, and most of the news is really just designed to incite your emotions, right? And not really share a lot of facts with you anymore, or twist the facts to do that, so they get ratings. That's really what it's designed to do. So they get ratings, so they stay on the television. And if you allow that affect you in your life, you're going around every single day upset and angry, and making poor decisions based upon certain things.
Right.
And when you just think about it, is if this really bothers me and this really makes me upset, what are the things that I can do about it? And so it boils down to, when you're looking at your life and taking control of everything in your life, what are the things that you can affect? What are the things that you can change? What are the things that you can implement that is immediately around you? And are you doing that? And then everything else that's happening in the world, politically or religiously or emotionally or business wise, or whatever, can you do anything about that? And if you are unable to do about it, then just accept it and then move on, right? Because if you're not going to, like for example, if politically you don't like what's going on politically, well, then if you don't like it and you're not going to do anything about it, then why are you complaining about it? Why are you upset about it? Why are you,
it's the national pastime of all nations. That's why.
Right. You being stressed out about it, you being angry about it, you being upset about it does absolutely nothing for anybody. Let me just say that, right?
Right.
And if it really bothers you, then what are you doing about it? Are you going to rallies? Are you setting up rallies? Are you running for Congress? Like, if you really want to make and affect change, maybe you should think about considering running for Congress, or helping get somebody elected to Congress that have the same beliefs that you do, because then you're taking now positive action to implement change that can really affect your life and other people's lives. And then other things that are not like riots and rallies in Seattle or in the capital city or in Baltimore, all that kind of stuff. For me, I'm not there, and so I'm not rioting, I'm not protesting, and so that whatever happens, unfortunately, is outside of my control. And because it's outside of my control, me being upset about it doesn't do anything, unless I take that energy that I'm upset with and then go and do some rallies here in Chicago where I'm at, or do something with that, right? So
So we watch movies, and during the process of watching the movies, there are times that we're like laughing and we're happy. There's times when like it's horror, we're afraid, or murder mystery, like the person that you like just got killed and we're sad or we're mad, or we go through all of these emotions. And then when it's over, we talk about it, and we know that it's a fake movie, and they didn't really kill my favorite actress and all that sort of stuff. And we have this thing called reality, which we see on the news, and we think, and I just want to kind of reinforce what you say, a lot of it is not what actually happened. And And the example that I want to give you happened, I believe it was in Honduras. One of my friends was a volunteer for an international volunteer organization. And she was telling me that one of their volunteers was in Honduras, was in this town outside of the main city, and they're watching the news, and there's this huge riot going on. People are yelling and screaming and everything else, and he's in this town. So they got a hold of him and says, "You got to get out of there. This is terrible." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, it's on the news." He says, He says, "There's two coffee shops. They're across the street from each other. And a bunch of people congregate at one and a bunch of people congregate at the other. And they're just sitting around and nothing's happening. Then the news shows up with all the big cameras, and one group gets up and yells at the other group gets up, and they yell back and forth for about 20 minutes. And then when the camera crew is all done, they put everything away and they leave, and we go back to drinking coffee." So there's no, now I'm not suggesting at all that's what happened anywhere in the United States, because you've got burning buildings and all the rest of it. But he just said, like, you guys don't believe what you see on the news just, as fact, because when you're actually somewhere, maybe the story is a lot different, and understand that the news is there to present a worldview that they want to get you to believe. And so this has nothing to do with what you were talking about specifically, but it had to do with the fact that sometimes what we see on the news is this chop and this chop and that chop, and not the whole picture, and keep that in mind.
So as you say, Scott, just to summarize, there's always, when something happens, there's always three sides of a story, right? it's this
your
side,
story, my story, and the truth.
And what actually happened, right?
Right.
So, yeah,
it's funny.
And people forget that, right? They just get caught up in a narrative. They get caught up in a situation, and it goes back to, again, emotional intelligence, right? Recognizing what's happening, recognizing how you're feeling about what's happening, and then determining what to do from that point in time. If you just get caught up and let yourself get caught up, not recognizing what's going on, not being aware of your emotions and other people's emotions as that occurs, then you've lost control. You've given away, responsibility for that, and you're not in control of your life anymore. So, taking responsibility for everything that's happening, recognizing that it's happening, and then deciding what to do from there. That's really where the power comes from. That's really where that enables you to take control of your own life and affect change the way that you want it to happen, versus just letting things happen around you.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think that's a great place to wrap up this conversation. So, Chaffee, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Scott.
And if somebody wanted to take their business to the next level, they understand they need a mentor, they need a coach, that would be you. What can they do?
Definitely go to my website. Check out some of the information on my website at http://www.keyconceptcoaching.com, www.keyconceptcoaching.com. And if you want to have a conversation with me, go to keyconceptcoaching.com/schedule. So just /schedule. And you can check my calendar and schedule a time, and would love to have a conversation. So
awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.